This video is sponsored by Squarespace. If you watch Succession, then there's no doubt in my mind that you have a favourite character, even one that you love to hate. Maybe you're rooting for Kendall, maybe you look forward to Logan, or maybe you want to laugh at Cousin Greg. But for me, there's one character that, whenever he's on screen, even just for a brief second, my eyes will naturally hone in on whatever he's doing, and that's Tom Wambsgans. Whenever a character is cast correctly, it becomes near impossible to imagine anyone else playing their role. But in the case of Tom, I genuinely don't think any other actor could do it justice. Through his comedic timing, his emotional transparency and relatable reactions, Matthew Macfadyen brings a unique texture to this performance that somehow still stands out in an overcrowded ensemble of top-tier talent. For decades, Macfadyen was a jobbing actor, mostly popping up in British TV series, until he played the beloved Mr. Darcy in Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice in 2005. But it was in 2018, at the age of 44, that he would fulfill his most famous role as the emotionally delicate, selfish social climber, Tom Wambsgans, which has to be the best privileged rich guy name of all time. The character would earn Macfadyen a whole host of awards, including his first Emmy. So let's take a deeper look at what makes this performance so engrossing to observe. The first key is the physicality of the character. The clearest sign that you've delivered a signature performance is that the audience immediately want to do an impression of it, and can instinctively mimic the character's physical mannerisms. So what are some of Tom's idiosyncrasies? Firstly, it's hand gestures. Whenever Tom's hands aren't in his pockets, he's quite the showman, often using these exaggerated movements to illustrate his points, but the more flustered he gets, the more chaotic the hand gestures become. This is where Matthew's background in theatre comes into play, as he always finds a physical way to communicate his emotional state to the audience. Like here, when he's feeling trapped inside the boat scandal that could end his career, he presses his hands against the door like he's already a prisoner in a cell. Or when he wants to communicate to Shiv that he'll submit to whatever the terms of their prenup are, he holds his hands up in the air like he's at her mercy. It's easy to take these little touches for granted, but imagine how dull these scenes could be if they cast someone much more straight-talking or butch, as without these animated expressions, then he wouldn't be nearly as entertaining to watch. Although he's the definition of just another corporate yes man, Tom stands out in this toxic environment because he's quite clumsy and awkward looking. One of the many insults thrown at him throughout the series is comparing him to Star Wars C-3PO, and when you watch Tom's walk with his hands robotically held out at his side, it's not exactly inaccurate. Matthew also gives Tom this dumbfounded look on his face, where his mouth just hangs open for long periods of time, especially when he's upset, which gives the impression he's like an open wound, his emotions just pouring straight out of him. A huge character trait is invading other people's personal space. Even just by proximity, notice how Tom is always creeping closer and closer to the people he's talking to or engaging with, which makes our relationship with him feel quite intimate. And if he's not just leaning closer, he's outright making physical contact with them, especially Greg. This makes Tom not really belong in this cutthroat corporate environment, as unlike the other emotionally closed characters in the show, Tom is an affectionate human being who craves physical connection. For example, notice the contrast between the way he and Shiv enter their wedding party. Shiv walks straight to her seat without touching anybody, and Tom makes physical contact with everyone along the way. But it's not just people. If you watch Tom closely enough, you'll see that he's actually constantly touching things around him to soothe his anxiety. He's a very physical presence, as if there's not something in his hand for him to fidget with. He may even just gently touch himself. Take this moment as an example, where Tom sits down for breakfast with Greg after the traumatizing boar on the floor scene. And just note how many things Tom touches in the space of 10 seconds. From his napkin to pulling in his chair, to every piece of cutlery one by one with his right hand, and his plate with his left hand, and then reaches across to touch Greg affectionately. Or when he's nervous at the hearing and doesn't know what to do with his body, notice how he simultaneously touches things while also doing his confused C-3PO arms. Frequently making physical contact with items in the room like this makes Tom feel very emotionally present in a way other characters just don't. Which leads into the next key, emotional transparency. There is something especially childish about Tom Wambsgans. The way he feels and shows his emotions is so raw and sensitive that he sometimes feels more like a tall boy than a grown man.
And you create this kind of protective shell, but underneath, we're all just little nudie turtles.
Just from his body language and facial expressions, we're never left in the dark about what the character is feeling, as he's so in touch with his emotions that you sense he may just burst into tears at any moment. Every actor has a different philosophy and technique that works for them, but Matthew appears to follow a form of the Meisner technique, which encourages actors to not focus on themselves and instead concentrate on their immediate environment.
When I work on a part, I don't sort of sit down and go, right, I'm going to do this and do this. I just sort of try and keep an open mind. I don't try and commit to things or make decisions until the last minute. Jeremy or Sarah or Brian. Their character, I look into their eyes and they will tell me how to be as Tom or as whoever. It not being all about what's inside you, because the idea is you're fed by external stimulus and not by something that you're sort of summoning up from inside. It's to do with what you're seeing.
This is an interesting approach that works especially well with a show like Succession, as given the abuse of power structure, Tom is in a constant state of reactivity to the ever-changing plot or being subservient to whatever his superiors need. So by looking externally for directions in how he should feel internally, it makes Matthew's performance much more theatrical, and we end up relating to his character because he seems more fragile than the repressed Roys. For example, in one of my favourite scenes, when Shiv is role-playing in the bedroom with Tom and says that he's not good enough for her and she doesn't love him, rather than the hurt feeling coming from the inside out, instead Matthew externally reacts to what he's hearing and actively searches in her eyes to determine whether or not what she's saying is true. He's making his emotional processing something that's happening on the surface, as if it needs to be externally confirmed before the character can internalize it. This is actually quite common for Tom, always a step behind and usually playing catch-up in every scene as he emotionally comes to terms with the new information. Or Macfadyen shows us his character trying to hide his emotions behind a smile or a laugh, only to reveal his honest reaction seconds later. This is important because it helps us understand how much fear is coursing through Tom's veins and why he needs to put on such a brave face. But like he says, underneath his hard shell, he's just a nudie turtle, a gentle, sensitive child. For instance, when Shiv is discussing the possibility of a threesome, and Tom doubts he'll be able to perform adequately, notice the contrast between Tom's brave face and the devastated face he shows us immediately after.
I haven't done a stadium gig before.
Honey.
By playing the character as someone so delicate, the audience feel an instinctive need to protect Tom, as despite his power-hungry personality, he still comes across as somewhat pure and innocent. He's not unlike Michael Scott from The Office, in the sense that there's not much subtlety to Tom. He can try to hold in his emotions, but even if he does, he's still going to mope around like a teenager until he finds a way to physically get it out. That might mean throwing bottles or trying to fight you if he's upset, or picking you up or pounding his chest like a gorilla if he's happy. Just like Matthew's strategy intends, Tom isn't much of a thinker. He's much more of a reactor to his environment, desperately hanging on to the Roy's coattails for dear life. And the final key is his voice, and I don't just mean that it's crazy for an English guy to somehow pull off this impossibly posh American accent. Throughout Succession, Macfadyen isn't just drawing us in with his physical idiosyncrasies, he's also using a wide vocal range to capture our attention. Matthew changes the tone of his voice depending on who he's talking to. To anyone above him, he sounds submissive and soft. To anyone below him, he sounds authoritative and rude. For instance, he pronounces the name Greg in a far more condescending tone than any other family member.
Look at Nick Braun, who plays Greg. I suddenly think, oh, there's Greg. Neither do I, Greg!
Or when he's talking to Shiv, his pitch is a lot higher, like he's the submissive peacemaker of the relationship.
And my voice goes very high with Sarah, partly through fear. So I start, it's very like, honey, 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 no, no.
Hey, Shiv.
I'm home. Hey.
Hi.
But you're here.
Uh-huh.
There are so many different sides of Tom for every occasion. Even when he doesn't mean to, he often comes across as so desperate for affection that it's as if he's playing verbal footsie with whoever he's talking to.
I respect you, but I'm not awed by you, and that I like you, but I need you to like me before I can love you.
Everybody loves a strong line of dialogue, especially when it's delivered clean in just the right way. But when the story is chaotic and emotions are running high, it's better to have an off-the-cuff flavour to it, which Matthew manages by being so in the scene that he sometimes stutters and stammers over his words, as if his thoughts and feelings are competing against one another on the way out of his mouth.
But did he just a heads up, a family heads up, just a.
This all stems from Matthew's philosophy, as by choosing to go into each scene with no expectations, it allows for these little moments of imperfection to squeeze through to make it feel more authentic. As much as Tom is selfish at times, there's also a real tenderness to his character that make him the best possible person to be on the front lines for the famous phone call at Connor's wedding. As he tries to handle the heartbreaking chaos in real time, just listen to the way Matthew's voice quivers through layers of blossoming grief.
Is Siobhan there?
Ken's going to get her right now.
He's not here, I don't think.
This phone call feels so realistic because we can see Tom managing his own emotions while also being dutiful to others at the same time. His sensitivity always shines through. You can feel how much he cares, even in his bedside manner when the shocked kids need someone to hold firm and steady to break the news.
Is he okay at all?
He's not okay. No, he's not.
Given the show is filled with hard-nosed misanthropes, Succession needed a softer character like Tom, not just for comic relief, but for someone to soak up the emotional conflict in each scene and react to it for us. As without someone sensitive in the room for us to relate to, the story could come across as heartless and sterile, whereas instead we get to see a clumsy boy actively craving intimacy in a vicious corporate environment. And because he doesn't come in overly prepared or harnessed to a specific way he wants the scene to go, Macfadyen's delivery flows so naturally that it barely feels scripted. As by wearing Tom's heart on his sleeve, accompanied by his physical quirks, it all comes together to make the character feel very present, as if he's just honestly reacting in real time. Which is why when you're watching Succession, don't be surprised that your eyes naturally glide to Matthew Macfadyen. As whether he's in the foreground or background, there's no one more emotionally interesting to watch than Tom Wambsgans. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Everything is online these days, and there's no better way to deliver a strong first impression than an elegant, professional-looking website. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform you can use to build your brand and grow your business, so whether it's showing off your creative work or selling a product or a service, Squarespace makes this process so much smoother. For example, if you're starting a small business, then setting up a website that fully takes care of the complete sales process for you is a massive head start. They also provide an internal video studio app on your phone or tablet, so even if you're not much of an editor, you can easily assemble professional-looking videos that engage your audience. And they provide you with all of your analytics internally, so you can keep track of all of your sales and page visits and build a marketing strategy around your most popular products. So go to squarespace.com for your free trial, and then once you're ready to launch your page, use my promo code OBSERVATION to get 10% off your first website or domain purchase. Well, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching. But if you could now give the video a like, possibly even leave a comment and click on that subscribe button, it will encourage that mysterious algorithm to do its thing. And if you want to support the channel personally, you can check out my Patreon.